Sir. I think your little girl saved my future. The quiet words settled into the silence like a single drop of rain falling onto still water, and Nathan Brooks found himself unable to speak. His hand remained frozen on the polished brass handle of the presidential suite door while he looked at the young woman standing beneath the warm hallway lights. Midnight had wrapped the luxury hotel in an almost sacred calm. Beyond the towering windows at the end of the corridor, rain drifted gently across the Chicago skyline, turning thousands of city lights into soft reflections that shimmered against the glass. Nathan had expected a late room service delivery or perhaps another executive with an urgent business question that could not wait until morning. Instead, he found a stranger whose soaked light blue sweater clung to her shoulders, whose worn canvas backpack rested quietly against her side, and whose tired blue eyes held more honesty than he had seen in years. She looked no older than 25. Her chestnut hair, still damp from the storm outside, framed a gentle face untouched by expensive cosmetics or carefully rehearsed charm. She stood with quiet dignity despite obvious exhaustion, as though life had tested her many times without ever convincing her to surrender her kindness. Neither of them moved. The distant hum of an elevator echoed softly before fading into silence again. Somewhere far below, traffic continued through downtown streets, but on the executive floor time itself seemed to pause. Nathan finally cleared his throat. I am sorry. Have we met before? The young woman slowly shook her head. No, sir. Her voice carried neither fear nor expectation. Only sincerity. Nathan studied her carefully. Then how does my daughter know you? She lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering, choosing every word with extraordinary care. She probably does not remember me. Nathan frowned slightly. His 9-year-old daughter, Lily, loved talking to strangers far more than he ever felt comfortable with. Ever since losing his wife 6 years earlier, he had worried constantly about protecting the little family they still had. Yet Lily somehow believed that every person deserved one kind smile before the day ended. It was a lesson her mother had taught her long ago. The young woman looked back into Nathan's eyes. This afternoon she found me sitting alone near the indoor garden. Nathan listened without interrupting. I had just learned that the interview I traveled almost 700 miles for had been cancelled before I even walked into the building. She smiled faintly, though sadness remained behind it. I thought I had reached the end of every plan I made. Nathan remained silent. She continued softly. Your daughter sat beside me without asking why I looked sad. She showed me a picture she had colored with butterflies flying above a little house. The young woman paused, taking a slow breath. At the bottom she had written, "Everyone deserves a place that feels like home." Nathan immediately recognized the drawing. Lily had spent nearly an hour coloring those butterflies earlier that morning while waiting for him to finish a meeting. The stranger looked down at her hands before speaking again. She smiled, wished me a better tomorrow, and ran back to you before I even had the chance to thank her. Nathan felt something shift quietly inside him. Boardrooms, billion-dollar negotiations, and luxury hotels had taught him how to recognize ambition, confidence, and deception, but nothing had prepared him for simple gratitude delivered with such quiet grace. The young woman looked toward the hallway as if ready to leave. I did not come here asking for money. I did not come asking for a job. I only wanted the father who raised that little girl to know that one small act of kindness stopped someone from giving up tonight. Nathan looked at the stranger standing in the rain-soaked silence beyond his doorway, and for the first time in many years, success, wealth, and titles suddenly felt far less important than the quiet words of someone who had absolutely nothing to gain by speaking them. Nathan remained standing in the open doorway long after the young woman finished speaking. During years of leading board meetings and negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, he had learned that the loudest people usually wanted something. The quietest ones often carried the greatest truth. He looked carefully at the stranger before him. Her shoes were soaked from walking through the rain, and tiny drops of water glistened on the marble floor beneath her feet. Yet she never once glanced inside the luxurious suite with envy. Her attention remained fixed only on him, as though expressing gratitude was the only reason she had climbed 23 floors in the middle of the night. Nathan finally offered a gentle smile. "May I at least know the name of the person who came all this way just to say thank you?" She hesitated before answering. "Grace Miller." "I am Nathan." She nodded politely. "I know." Nathan laughed softly. "Of course you do. I introduced myself to everyone during the charity event this afternoon." Grace smiled for the first time that evening. "Your daughter introduced herself first. She said, 'My daddy builds hotels, but my mommy said people are more important than buildings.'" Nathan lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those words belonged to his late wife. Lily had simply carried them forward. The hallway grew quiet again as the rain continued tapping gently against the distant windows. Nathan noticed Grace lightly shivering from the cold. Without making the moment feel uncomfortable, he stepped back from the doorway. "Please come inside for a few minutes. You should not have to stand in wet clothes while telling your story." Grace immediately shook her head. "I do not want to intrude." "You are not. I really should leave." Nathan looked at her calmly. "Would you refuse the same kindness if someone offered it to my daughter?" Grace looked down at the floor. The question lingered between them. After several silent seconds, she answered honestly. "No." Nathan smiled gently. "Then let me offer you the same respect." Grace slowly stepped inside. The suite overlooked the glowing Chicago skyline, where countless lights reflected across the rain-covered glass. A quiet fireplace warmed the spacious sitting room, and soft instrumental piano music drifted almost unnoticed through hidden speakers. Grace carefully removed her damp jacket and held it in both hands instead of placing it on the furniture. Nathan noticed every small gesture. She treated another person's space with the same care she would have shown in her own home. He walked toward the small refreshment area and prepared 2 cups of hot chamomile tea. When he returned, Grace accepted the cup with both hands. "Thank you." They sat across from one another in comfortable chairs separated by a small wooden table. Neither of them hurried to speak. The silence felt peaceful rather than awkward. Finally Nathan asked, "What happened after your interview was cancelled?" Grace looked into the steam rising from the tea before answering. "There was no interview." Nathan frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "When I arrived, the receptionist told me someone else had accepted the position yesterday. They forgot to call me." She smiled sadly. "I spent $700 on travel, hotel, and food. Almost everything I had saved." Nathan listened quietly. "I sat in the indoor garden because I needed a place where nobody would notice I was trying not to cry." Grace looked toward the city lights beyond the window. Then Lily walked over with her drawing. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply smiled and told me tomorrow could still become my favorite day. Nathan felt warmth spread through his heart, mixed with an ache he had not expected. His daughter had inherited the rare gift of seeing people instead of appearances. Grace carefully placed the untouched tea back onto the table. "I almost bought a bus ticket home tonight because I believed my dream had ended." She looked directly at Nathan with quiet gratitude shining in her tired blue eyes. "Instead, your little girl reminded me that hope sometimes arrives dressed as an ordinary conversation. That is why I could not leave this city without thanking the father who taught her how to care about strangers." For a long moment Nathan said nothing. The gentle crackle of the fireplace filled the silence while the rain outside gradually softened into a light mist over the sleeping city. He had built hotels across the country, spoken before investors, governors, and business leaders, yet the most meaningful conversation he had experienced in years was taking place with a young woman who had arrived carrying nothing except a worn backpack and an honest heart. He glanced toward a framed photograph resting on a nearby bookshelf. It showed Lily sitting on her late mother's shoulders during a family vacation beside Lake Michigan. Both of them were laughing as dozens of colorful butterflies fluttered through a nearby garden. Grace noticed the photograph and smiled gently. She looks just like her mother. Nathan nodded. She does. His voice grew quieter. My wife believed that every stranger deserved to be treated like someone who mattered. Lily remembers almost everything she taught her. Grace looked at the picture for another moment. She would be very proud of both of you. Nathan took a slow breath before asking another question. What were you hoping to do after the interview? Grace wrapped both hands around the warm cup of tea. I wanted to work in hospitality. Nathan raised his eyebrows with genuine curiosity. Why hotels? A peaceful smile crossed Grace's face. Because my grandmother owned a small bed and breakfast in Missouri. It only had 6 rooms, but every guest left feeling like family. She used to tell me that people never remember how expensive a room was. They remember how someone made them feel inside it. Nathan could not help smiling. That sounds like someone I would have enjoyed meeting. Grace laughed softly. She would have liked you. She believed kindness and good manners never go out of style. Nathan leaned back in his chair. What happened after she retired? Grace's smile slowly faded, though it never disappeared completely. My mother became very sick several years ago. I stayed home to care for her. Every dollar I saved for college and every opportunity one found had to wait. She looked down at the cup in her hands. When my mother finally recovered enough to take care of herself again, I decided it was finally my turn to chase my dream. Nathan listened carefully, never interrupting. Grace continued with quiet honesty. I thought this interview would be the beginning of a new chapter. When it disappeared before I even walked through the door, I believed maybe I had waited too long. Nathan understood disappointment better than most people imagined. Long before becoming successful, he had experienced years when every closed door felt permanent. Looking out across the glowing skyline, he spoke almost to himself. Sometimes the door that closes is protecting us from walking into the wrong room. Grace looked at him thoughtfully. Do you really believe that? Nathan smiled gently. I have spent most of my life opening hotel doors. The ones that changed my life were never the ones I expected. Another comfortable silence settled between them. It no longer belonged to strangers. It belonged to two people discovering that hardship often speaks the same language regardless of wealth or circumstance. Nathan finally stood and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. Below them, headlights flowed through the streets like quiet rivers of light stretching toward tomorrow morning. Without turning around, he asked one final question. Grace, where are you planning to stay tonight? She hesitated before answering honestly. I checked out of the motel this afternoon because I could not afford another night. Nathan slowly turned back toward her. Grace offered a small apologetic smile that carried more dignity than embarrassment. I was going to wait at the downtown bus terminal until the first bus leaves at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. Then I plan to go home and figure out what to do next, one day at a time. Nathan looked into her calm blue eyes and realized that despite everything she had lost, she had never once asked him to solve her problems. That quiet strength moved him more deeply than any business success ever had. Grace expected Nathan to offer sympathy. She did not expect him to remain so quiet. He walked slowly toward the fireplace, resting one hand lightly against the mantel while watching the flames dance behind the glass. The warm light softened the thoughtful expression on his face. Finally he turned back toward her with the same calm composure that had defined every word he had spoken since opening the door. Grace, he said gently, no one should spend the night waiting on a bench inside a bus terminal if there is another choice. She immediately shook her head. I appreciate your kindness, but I cannot accept charity. Nathan smiled with quiet understanding instead of disappointment. What makes you believe kindness is the same thing as charity? Grace lowered her eyes for a moment. Because I have worked very hard not to depend on strangers. Nathan nodded slowly. That tells me a great deal about your character. He stepped closer, careful to leave a respectful distance between them. May I ask you one question? Grace looked up. Of course. If Lily were traveling alone someday and someone offered her a safe place to sleep without asking for anything in return, would you hope she accepted? Grace did not answer immediately. She imagined the cheerful little girl who had handed her a drawing only hours earlier. After several quiet seconds, she smiled faintly. Yes, I would. Nathan returned the smile. Then allow me the same peace of mind tonight. Grace looked around the elegant suite before looking back at him. She could see no hidden expectation in his eyes. There was only simple concern. At last she nodded gently. Only for one night. Only for one night, Nathan replied. He picked up the telephone beside the sitting area and placed a brief call. His tone remained completely ordinary, never revealing that he owned the hotel itself. Good evening, he said. Could someone prepare one of the garden view guest rooms for a visitor? Please include breakfast at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Charge everything to my personal account. He thanked the employee and quietly ended the call. Grace watched with curiosity. You really did not have to do that. Nathan smiled. Perhaps not. But I wanted to. He opened a nearby cabinet and removed a neatly folded umbrella. Your room is ready. I will walk you there. Together they stepped into the peaceful hallway where the thick carpet softened every footstep. The rain had almost stopped, leaving only scattered drops gliding down the tall windows overlooking the city. They reached the private elevator, and while waiting, Grace noticed a large framed photograph hanging on the wall. It showed hundreds of smiling hotel employees gathered together during an anniversary celebration. Everyone looks genuinely happy, she said quietly. Nathan followed her gaze. A hotel is only as welcoming as the people inside it. Grace nodded. My grandmother always believed the same thing. The elevator doors opened with a gentle chime. They stepped inside, descending through the quiet building while soft instrumental music played overhead. Neither of them felt the need to fill the silence with unnecessary conversation. Sometimes respect sounded quieter than words. When the doors opened on the 19th floor, the night manager was already waiting beside a beautifully prepared guest room. He smiled warmly as Nathan approached. Good evening, Mr. Brooks. Nathan acknowledged him with a polite nod before introducing Grace simply as a guest. The manager turned toward her with genuine warmth. Welcome. We are very happy to have you with us. Grace thanked him with quiet sincerity. As she accepted the room key, she noticed that everyone treated Nathan with remarkable respect, yet he never behaved like someone seeking attention. Before leaving, Nathan paused beside the doorway. Sleep well, he said gently. Tomorrow deserves the chance to become a better day. Grace smiled with grateful eyes. Thank you for reminding me that good people still exist. Nathan watched the door close softly behind her, and as he walked back toward the elevator, he realized that the greatest legacy he and his late wife had built together was not wealth, luxury, or success. It was a little girl whose simple kindness had quietly changed 2 lives in a single day. Morning arrived with gentle sunlight spilling across the Chicago skyline, replacing the rain with a clear blue sky that reflected beautifully through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the luxury hotel. Grace woke before her alarm, momentarily forgetting where she was. For a few peaceful seconds she simply listened to the quiet hum of the city awakening below before remembering everything that had happened the night before. She carefully folded the blankets, straightened the pillows, and placed every item back exactly where she had found it. Her grandmother had always reminded her that gratitude could be shown without speaking a single word. At exactly 8 o'clock, there was a soft knock on the door. A hotel attendant entered with a breakfast tray carrying fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, warm biscuits, oatmeal, orange juice, and freshly brewed coffee. Beside the tray rested a small handwritten card. Grace waited until the attendant left before unfolding it. The note contained only one sentence written in neat handwriting. Never stop believing that tomorrow can surprise you. Nathan. Grace smiled quietly before placing the card inside the front pocket of her backpack. It already felt like something she wanted to keep. After breakfast, she checked out of the guest room and thanked the front desk employee with genuine warmth. As she stepped into the bright lobby, she paused beside the indoor garden where she had first met Lily the previous afternoon. The little bench remained exactly where it had been, surrounded by colorful flowers and gently fluttering butterflies attracted by the morning sunlight shining through the glass ceiling. Grace smiled to herself before continuing toward the revolving doors. Meanwhile, several floors above, Nathan sat with Lily inside a quiet breakfast lounge overlooking the same garden. Lily happily spread strawberry jam across a biscuit while sketching another picture filled with butterflies, little houses, and smiling faces. She looked up at her father with bright curiosity. "Daddy, did the butterfly lady smile again?" Nathan smiled. "Yes, she did." Lily seemed pleased with the answer. "Good. She looked sad yesterday." Nathan gently brushed a loose strand of hair away from Lily's face. "How did you know she needed someone to talk to?" Lily shrugged as though the answer were obvious. Everybody else walked past her. "Mommy used to say lonely people are easy to miss if you only look with your eyes." Nathan felt his heart tighten gently. Even years after her mother's passing, Lily continued carrying pieces of her wisdom into the lives of strangers. Before Nathan could answer, his executive assistant, Michael Reynolds, approached the table carrying a leather folder. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Nathan greeted him with a nod. Michael lowered his voice respectfully. "There is an opening in our hospitality trainee program. One of the candidates accepted an opportunity with another property late last night." Nathan listened carefully without responding immediately. Michael continued, "Human Resources is reopening interviews this morning." Nathan glanced toward the indoor garden below where Grace had found hope only hours earlier. He remembered the way she spoke about her grandmother's little bed and breakfast and how naturally she described making guests feel welcome. He looked back at Michael. Would she meet the qualifications? Michael opened the folder. Based on her application, yes. She has customer service experience, strong references, and excellent recommendations from previous employers. Nathan remained thoughtful. Do not change the hiring process. Michael nodded. Of course. Simply make sure she knows another opportunity became available. If she earns the position, it must be because of her ability, not because of me. Michael smiled respectfully. I understand. Nathan watched him leave before looking back at Lily, who had just finished another drawing. This time 3 butterflies flew above a small cottage surrounded by flowers. At the bottom she carefully wrote the same sentence she always seemed to believe with all her heart. Everyone deserves a place that feels like home. Nathan quietly folded the drawing and slipped it into his jacket pocket, never imagining that before the day ended, those simple words would begin changing all of their lives once again. Grace had almost reached the hotel entrance when the sound of someone calling her name made her stop. She turned to see Michael Reynolds walking toward her with an easy smile and a professional confidence that immediately put people at ease. Miss Miller, he asked politely. Grace nodded. Yes? Michael slowed his pace as he approached, careful not to appear hurried. I hope I am not interrupting your morning. Grace smiled softly. Not at all. Michael held a slim folder in one hand. A position unexpectedly became available in our hospitality trainee program early this morning. Human Resources wondered whether you might still be interested in interviewing. Grace blinked in surprise. Another opening? Michael nodded. One of our selected candidates accepted a position at another property last night. Grace looked toward the indoor garden where she had first met Lily only a day earlier. The coincidence felt almost unbelievable. May I ask why you thought of me? Michael answered with complete honesty. The receptionist remembered your application after hearing about the opening. Your background matches what our team is looking for. Grace studied his expression. There was no sign of obligation or sympathy, only quiet professionalism. If I interview, she said gently, I want to be evaluated exactly like everyone else. Michael smiled. That is exactly how our process works. Grace accepted the folder with both hands. Then I would be grateful for the opportunity. Less than an hour later she found herself sitting outside a conference room overlooking the hotel's peaceful rooftop garden. Sunlight streamed through wide glass windows while fountains whispered softly among flowering plants below. Grace reviewed her resume one final time before taking a slow calming breath. The door opened, and a friendly woman in her early 50s stepped into the hallway. Good morning. I am Margaret Collins, Director of Guest Experience. Please come in. Grace smiled politely and entered the room. The interview felt surprisingly natural. Margaret asked about previous jobs, customer service, and long-term goals, but she also asked questions Grace had never heard before. Tell me about someone who changed your life through kindness. Describe a moment when you chose patience instead of frustration. What makes a guest feel truly welcome? Grace answered every question honestly. She spoke about her grandmother remembering every returning guest by name, about staying late to clean rooms because weary travelers deserved fresh sheets, and about believing that genuine hospitality began long before someone received a room key. Margaret listened carefully without interrupting. When the conversation ended, she closed Grace's file and smiled warmly. Miss Miller, technical skills can always be taught. Compassion cannot. Grace felt her heart begin to race. Margaret extended her hand across the table. Congratulations. We would be honored to welcome you into our hospitality training program. Grace accepted the handshake with quiet disbelief. Thank you. I promise I will work hard every single day. Something tells me that promise will be easy to keep. While Grace completed the final employment paperwork, Nathan sat several floors above in an executive meeting discussing expansion plans for future hotel properties. Charts filled the large conference screen, and senior executives reviewed financial forecasts with practiced confidence. Nathan listened respectfully, but his thoughts occasionally drifted toward the interview taking place elsewhere in the building. His phone vibrated softly beneath the conference table. A brief message from Michael appeared on the screen. She earned the position completely on her own. Nathan allowed himself the smallest smile before placing the phone aside. He felt an unexpected sense of relief, not because Grace had been hired, but because she would never owe her success to his influence. She had opened that door herself. As the meeting continued around him, Nathan quietly remembered something his late wife often said whenever people praised one of his hotels. She would simply smile and answer, "Buildings welcome guests. People make them feel at home." Looking through the boardroom windows toward the bright Chicago skyline, Nathan realized that somewhere inside the hotel below, someone had just taken the first step toward becoming exactly the kind of person who could make strangers feel that they truly belonged. 3 weeks passed with surprising quiet, yet every day seemed to leave a small mark on the lives of everyone inside the hotel. Grace arrived before sunrise each morning, greeting housekeepers, receptionists, maintenance staff, and restaurant employees by name. She learned quickly, but what impressed her supervisors most was not her efficiency. It was the way people relaxed the moment she spoke to them. She remembered returning guests without checking the computer. She noticed when an elderly traveler needed extra time walking through the lobby. She knelt beside frightened children until worried parents returned. She thanked every employee who helped her, regardless of their position. None of those moments appeared in performance reports, yet everyone remembered them. Nathan quietly noticed them as well. Whenever business brought him through the lobby, he occasionally paused just long enough to observe Grace from a respectful distance. She never realized he was watching. One afternoon he saw her carry a fresh bouquet of flowers to an elderly widow celebrating her wedding anniversary alone for the first time. Another morning he watched her patiently help a confused tourist map out a walking route through downtown Chicago instead of simply pointing toward the concierge desk. Every act was small. Together they became extraordinary. One Saturday afternoon Lily arrived at the hotel after finishing a children's art workshop nearby. Nathan had promised to take her for hot chocolate before returning home. As they crossed the lobby, Lily suddenly stopped walking. Her face brightened with immediate recognition. "Daddy, it is the butterfly lady." Grace looked up from the reception desk and smiled warmly. "Hello, Lily." Before Nathan could say anything, Lily hurried over and proudly held up a new drawing. "I made another one." Grace knelt to Lily's eye level and admired the colorful picture. Butterflies floated above a small white cottage surrounded by flowers, while three smiling figures stood together beneath a bright blue sky. "It is beautiful," Grace said sincerely. "Who are the people?" Lily pointed proudly. "That is me. That is Daddy." Then she paused before pointing to the third figure. "I have not decided her name yet." Grace laughed softly, and even Nathan could not hide his smile. "She looks very kind," Grace replied. Lily nodded with complete confidence. "She is. She just does not know it yet." Nathan gently shook his head. "You always have a story behind your drawings." Lily grinned. "Pictures help people find happy endings." Grace carefully handed the drawing back. "I think your mommy would have loved that." Nathan's smile grew quieter, touched by gratitude rather than sadness. "I think she would have." Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before a guest approached the reception desk asking for assistance. Grace immediately returned to work with the same calm professionalism she showed every visitor. Nathan watched as she patiently answered questions, arranged transportation, and wished each departing guest a wonderful afternoon. She treated every person exactly the same. Wealth never impressed her. Neither did titles. Later that evening Nathan sat alone in his office reviewing routine employee evaluations. Grace's supervisor had written only a few sentences, yet each one reflected something Nathan had already witnessed with his own eyes. Creates comfort without effort. Builds trust naturally. Makes guests feel remembered. Nathan quietly folded the evaluation and placed it inside his desk instead of the personnel file. At that moment Michael knocked gently before entering. "There is something you should probably know," he said. Nathan looked up. "What is it?" Michael smiled. "Several employees have started calling Grace the heart of the lobby." Nathan looked toward the city lights glowing beyond the office windows. "That is a remarkable compliment." Michael nodded. "She earned it." Nathan remained silent for a long moment before speaking almost to himself. The finest hotels are never remembered because of marble floors or crystal chandeliers. He smiled thoughtfully. People remember how someone made them feel. Neither man realized that before another week had passed, one unexpected discovery would test the fragile trust that had quietly begun growing between two people who still knew far less about each other than either of them imagined. Nearly a month had passed since Grace first walked through the hotel's front doors as a trainee, and the building itself seemed brighter because of her presence. Guests frequently asked for her by name, not because company policy required exceptional service, but because she had an uncommon way of making people feel seen. Nathan admired that quality from a respectful distance, never allowing his position to interfere with her work. He wanted every achievement she earned to belong entirely to her. One Friday evening the hotel prepared for its annual Community Foundation Gala. Business leaders, local charities, educators, and volunteers filled the grand ballroom beneath sparkling crystal chandeliers while a string quartet performed softly near the entrance. Grace had been assigned to welcome arriving guests and assist with directions throughout the evening. She wore the same elegant employee uniform as every other member of the hospitality team, carrying herself with calm confidence and genuine warmth. Shortly before the program began, Margaret Collins approached with several presentation folders in her hands. "Grace, would you mind delivering these to the executive conference suite on the top floor? Mr. Brooks needs them before the opening remarks." Grace smiled. "Of course." She collected the folders and stepped into the private elevator without giving the request a second thought. As the elevator climbed quietly toward the executive level, she admired the glowing Chicago skyline stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. When the doors opened, the hallway was peaceful, illuminated by warm lighting and decorated with framed photographs celebrating decades of hotel history. Grace followed the room numbers until she reached the executive conference suite. The doors stood slightly open. She knocked softly before entering. "Excuse me. I have the presentation folders." Nathan looked up from reviewing his notes and smiled warmly. "Thank you, Grace. Please set them on the table." She stepped inside and carefully placed the folders beside his laptop. As she turned to leave, her eyes drifted toward a large framed photograph displayed prominently on the wall. It showed Nathan standing beside Lily during the grand opening ceremony of the hotel years earlier. Below the photograph rested an engraved bronze plaque that read Founder and Chairman. Carter Hospitality Group had never been mentioned anywhere. Instead, another plaque beside it displayed the current ownership after a corporate merger, listing Nathan Brooks as founder and executive chairman of Brooks Hospitality Collection. Grace slowly looked back at Nathan. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly as dozens of quiet moments suddenly connected inside her mind. The private suite. The remarkable respect shown by every manager. The effortless access to every department. The handwritten note. The unexpected interview opportunity. She whispered almost to herself, "You built all of this." Nathan closed the notebook in front of him and stood calmly. "Yes." Grace searched his face, hoping she had misunderstood. "You are the owner." Nathan nodded once. "I am." The room fell completely silent. Outside the windows, the last colors of sunset faded behind the city skyline while thousands of evening lights slowly illuminated the streets below. Grace lowered her eyes for a moment before speaking again. "Why did you never tell me?" Nathan answered honestly. "Because I wanted you to know me before you knew my title." Grace's voice remained gentle, but disappointment quietly settled beneath every word. "Now I do not know what was real." Nathan took one careful step forward before stopping, respecting the space between them. Everything was real. Grace looked toward the employee identification badge resting against her uniform. "Was the interview real?" "Yes." "The job?" "You earned it." She smiled sadly, not with anger but with quiet uncertainty. "Maybe I did. But now every compliment will make me wonder whether people were seeing my work or simply trying to please the owner." Nathan felt the weight of her words because they echoed questions he had asked himself throughout much of his own life. Grace gently removed her identification badge and placed it beside the presentation folders. "I cannot do my best work while doubting every reason I am here." She looked at Nathan with sincere gratitude. "Thank you for believing in me before I believed in myself. I will never forget that." Without another word, she quietly walked toward the door. Nathan watched her leave, resisting every impulse to stop her. The door closed softly behind her, and in the silence that followed he realized that wealth could create opportunities, but it could never convince an honest heart to stay where trust had begun to fade. The hotel felt strangely quieter after Grace left, even though nothing about the building itself had changed. Guests continued arriving with luggage, elevators continued rising toward elegant suites, and conversations still echoed through polished hallways, yet Nathan could not ignore the absence of the calm presence that had quietly transformed so many ordinary moments. 2 days later, a small envelope arrived at his office from Human Resources. Inside rested Grace's employee identification badge along with a neatly folded handwritten letter. There were no complaints, no accusations, and no disappointment directed toward anyone. She simply thanked every manager who had welcomed her, every coworker who had shown patience during her training, and every guest who had reminded her why she loved hospitality. Her final sentence lingered in Nathan's mind long after he finished reading. "The kindness I found here will always stay with me. I only hope one day I can earn it without wondering whether it was influenced by your generosity." Nathan carefully folded the letter and placed it beside the note she had received on her first morning at the hotel. That evening, Lily noticed something her father had tried to hide. While they sat together coloring pictures in the family living room, she quietly looked around before asking, "Daddy, why does our house feel lonely again?" Nathan looked toward the fireplace where Lily's butterfly drawing still rested inside a simple wooden frame. He smiled sadly. "Sometimes we only realize how much light someone brings after they leave." Lily climbed down from her chair and disappeared into her bedroom. A minute later she returned carrying the newest butterfly drawing she had finished that afternoon. 3 smiling people stood together beneath a bright blue sky beside a small white house surrounded by flowers. She placed the drawing gently into Nathan's hands. "Maybe the butterfly lady is waiting for someone to knock on her door this time." Nathan looked at his daughter for a long moment before quietly standing. Late that night, almost exactly 1 month after Grace had first arrived outside his hotel suite, Nathan drove across Chicago to the modest boarding house where Michael had located her, forwarding address through the employment records she had voluntarily provided during hiring. He carried only 2 things with him: Lily's drawing and Grace's original interview evaluation signed by Margaret Collins. The hallway was quiet when he gently knocked on her apartment door. After a few moments the door slowly opened. Grace looked surprised to see him standing there beneath the warm hallway light. Neither of them spoke immediately. Nathan offered a gentle smile. "A month ago someone knocked on my door because she wanted to say thank you. Tonight I hoped you might allow me to do the same." Grace remained silent as Nathan carefully handed her the evaluation. She unfolded the paper and slowly read every handwritten comment. "Honest. Compassionate. Creates comfort naturally. Makes every guest feel valued." At the bottom Margaret had written one final sentence. "This recommendation was completed before I learned Mr. Brooks had ever met Miss Miller. She earned every opportunity through her own character." Grace lowered the paper, her eyes quietly filling with emotion. Nathan then unfolded Lily's butterfly drawing. "She still believes there are 3 people in this picture," he said softly. "She keeps asking when the 3rd one is coming home." Grace smiled through grateful tears, not because of the drawing alone, but because nothing Nathan offered her that night involved money, power, or influence. He had come carrying only truth, respect, and the quiet courage to admit that trust mattered more than titles. Grace looked into his eyes and whispered, "I never wanted to be rescued." Nathan nodded gently. "I know. That is exactly why I admire you." She took one careful step forward. "And I never stopped believing the man I met that rainy night was real." Nathan smiled with peaceful certainty. "He was. He still is." Grace reached for his hand, and for the first time there was no misunderstanding standing between them. Months later, visitors entering the hotel often paused beside a framed butterfly drawing hanging near the lobby garden. Beneath it, a small plaque displayed only one simple sentence: "Everyone deserves a place that feels like home." Those who stopped long enough to read it rarely knew the story behind those words, but somehow they always walked away feeling that kindness, given freely and received with dignity, could still change everything.